Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going on this journey through the 20th century, but not through headlines or textbooks,
Right.
but through the eyes of Peter Drucker. You shared his autobiography, Adventures of a Bystander, with me. And I gotta say, it's not your typical life story. It's more like
Yeah,
a backstage pass to some of the biggest events and most influential people of his time.
exactly. Drucker wasn't just interested in recounting his own life. He used his experiences to illuminate the larger shifts, happening in society.
Yeah.
He was fascinated by individuals who were both participants in and observers of their times, what he called bystanders.
Okay, so let's unpack this idea of a bystander a bit more. What do you think Drucker meant by that? And how does it shape his perspective in the book?
Well, think about it this way. Sometimes those on the sidelines can see the whole picture more clearly
Yeah.
than those caught up in the action. Drucker believed that bystanders, by virtue of their unique vantage point, often had a deeper understanding of the times they lived in. They could see the connections, the contradictions, the things others might miss.
Yeah, and Drucker himself was a master observer, right? He wasn't just passively watching, he was actively analyzing, drawing connections, and extracting insights from these encounters.
Right.
And speaking of encounters, one of the most vivid figures in the book is his grandmother, Bertha Bond. He paints her as this incredibly strong, unconventional woman.
She definitely left a mark on him. One story that really struck me was the one where she confronted a young Nazi on a streetcar.
Oh, wow.
Imagine that, you're on public transport and this young man proudly displaying a swastika sits down.
Yeah,
What would you do?
yeah.
Bertha, at her age, didn't hesitate. She called them out, comparing Nazism to a bad case of acne.
Wow, that takes guts.
Right.
It really shows how she refused to be intimidated, even in the face of something as menacing as the rising Nazi Party.
Exactly. And you see echoes of that same courage and defiance of convention
Yeah,
throughout Drucker's life and work.
yeah.
He wasn't afraid to challenge assumptions, even those held by powerful figures.
She was also incredibly resourceful. Drucker recounts how she managed to obtain multiple passports during a time of strict controls.
What's fascinating about that story isn't just the act itself, but what it reveals about Drucker's own values. He clearly admired her ingenuity, her ability to navigate complex systems and bend rules when necessary.
Yeah.
It speaks to his own belief in individual initiative and the limitations of rigid bureaucracy.
So it sounds like Bertha Bond wasn't just a doting grandmother. She was a role model, a living example of the kind of independent critical thinking that Drucker championed throughout his life, and he encountered other powerful personalities who shaped his thinking right.
Absolutely. He writes about two figures in particular, Hemi and Genia Schwarzwald, who provide a fascinating study in contrasts. Hemi, a brilliant civil servant, chose a less prestigious career path, a deliberate break from his family's expectations. He was known for sharp intellect and sometimes abrasive personality, bluntly telling Drucker's mother that her dress looked like it belonged to her maid.
So that talk about honesty, maybe a little too much honesty, but it does point to a willingness to speak his mind, even when it might offend. Would you say that's a trait Drucker shared?
Definitely, Drucker wasn't one to shy away from difficult conversations or challenging the status quo. And while Hemi excelled in handling complex government tasks, his rigidity ultimately led to his failure in managing post-war inflation.
So even brilliance has its blind spots.
Right.
And what about Genia? How did she differ from him?
Genia was a force of nature. She founded a school for girls at a time when women were largely excluded from higher education.
Wow.
She had this warmth and charisma that drew people to her, and her approach to education was truly progressive.
It's interesting to see these two contrasting figures, the sharp analytical Hem and the warm charismatic Genia, both influencing Drucker. It makes me wonder how those opposing forces might have shaped his own worldview, his ability to see both the strengths and weaknesses of systems and individuals.
It's a great point. And speaking of complexities, there's another layer to Hemi's story that's particularly unsettling. Despite being married to a Jewish woman, he developed a strong anti-Semitic stance.
Wow.
It's a reminder that even brilliant minds can fall prey to prejudice, and that history is full of these jarring contradictions.
Absolutely. It's a sobering thought, especially given the historical context. And in the midst of these tumultuous times, Drucker encounters another figure who leaves a lasting impression, Count Tronic, a former socialist who becomes disillusioned after World War I.
This encounter is pivotal because it speaks to the clash between idealism and reality, a theme that resonates throughout Drucker's work. Tronick believed that the war had killed the socialist dream, and he warned of the rising danger of Hitler, a warning many dismissed at the time.
It's chilling to think about that knowing what we know now.
Right.
It speaks to the importance of heeding warnings even when they seem improbable. And how did this encounter shape Drucker's own views?
Well, remember, Drucker himself had socialist leanings in his youth. Tronick's disillusionment forced him to confront the limitations of ideology and the complexities of human nature. It pushed him towards a more pragmatic, nuanced view of society and the role of individuals within it.
And soon after, Drucker makes a life-altering decision. He moves to America.
Right.
It's this period he calls the Indian Summer of Innocence, a time of both optimism and looming threat. I'm curious to hear more about his early impressions of America, especially coming from a Europe on the brink of war.
Well, one anecdote that really captures the mixed bag of anxieties and opportunities is his encounter with the immigration department clerk, who, while worried about his own financial security, was also eager to help Drucker find a better paying job.
It's a fascinating glimpse into the American psyche during the Depression era. The American dream was still alive, but it was facing some serious challenges. And what about Drucker's observations on race relations in America?
That's where his bystander perspective becomes particularly insightful. He recounts a story about a dean advising a German Catholic refugee to send his son to a different college because it was really a university for the Irish.
Oh, wow.
And then there's the observation by Dr. Mordecai Johnson, president of Howard University, about the two melting pots in America, one for whites, one for blacks.
It's a stark reminder of the hypocrisy at the heart of the American dream, the reality that equality was far from universal. Did these observations influence Drucker's later work on management and social responsibility?
Absolutely. Drucker's time in America during the Indian Summer of Innocence wasn't just a personal journey, it was an intellectual awakening. It forced him to confront the gap between ideals and reality, and it laid the groundwork for his lifelong exploration of how organizations and individuals could create a more just and functional society.
This is already so insightful, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface of Adventures of a Bystander. You know, as I'm reading through Adventures of a Bystander, it's striking how many fascinating people Drucker crossed paths with. It wasn't just politicians and business leaders.
Right.
He seemed drawn to artists, journalists, thinkers who saw the world a bit differently.
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes this book so compelling. You know, Drucker gives us glimpses into these remarkable lives, and through his interactions with them, you start to see the development of his own ideas about leadership innovation, the human condition.
Yeah, for example, he writes about Noel Brailsford, a British journalist who was just a staunch believer in the power of dissent.
Right.
He really thought speaking truth to power could change the world. But then he witnesses the horrors of the Spanish Civil War, and it just shatters his idealism.
Yeah. Brailsford's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes even the most deeply held convictions can be shaken, you know, when confronted with the brutal realities of the world. It makes you wonder, how do you hold on to hope in the face of such darkness? How do you reconcile idealism with the messy complexities of human nature?
It's a question Drucker grapples with throughout the book.
Right.
And then there's Ernest Friedberg, a banker who was almost legendary for his ability to judge character. Drucker tells this story about a promoter with seemingly impeccable credentials who approaches Friedberg's firm with a can't-miss proposal. Everyone's ready to jump on board, but Friedberg just senses something's off. He simply states, "The man is a crook."
Wow.
And sure enough, he was right.
What's so fascinating about that story is that Friedberg couldn't even articulate why he felt that way.
Yeah.
He just knew. It speaks to the power of intuition, that sometimes experience and gut feeling can trump data and analysis. Have you ever had that feeling about someone where you just knew something wasn't right even if you couldn't explain it?
Oh, absolutely. It's like a sixth sense. And Drucker seems to be suggesting that cultivating that intuition, that ability to read people, is crucial, especially in fields like business, where relationships are everything.
Precisely. And it's not just about judging character. It's about understanding human behavior.
Yeah.
Drucker also writes about Charles Kilstad, a retail executive who could extract these brilliant insights about customer psychology from seemingly mundane experiences.
Okay.
He'd tell these long, winding stories about mismatched umbrellas or bra cup sizes.
Interesting.
And somehow he'd always tie it back to these universal principles of merchandising and marketing.
It reminds me of that saying, the devil's in the details. Kjellstad was a master at observing those little details that everyone else missed and then connecting the dots to see the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. One anecdote that really stands out is how Kjellstad dismantled this complex proposal for defense pricing by relating it back to his early days working in the bargain basement. He understood that human behavior is human behavior, regardless of the context.
It's a great reminder that sometimes practical experience can be just as valuable, if not more so, than theoretical knowledge.
Right.
And speaking of challenging the status quo, Drucker also had some interesting run-ins with media giants, including Henry Luce, the founder of Time Inc.
Ah, Luce. A visionary, no doubt, but also someone who had a very firm grip on the narrative that clashed with Drucker's approach to journalism, which emphasized objectivity and multiple perspectives. It's no surprise they had a somewhat contentious relationship.
Drucker even considered working for Time, but ultimately decided against it.
Yep.
He wasn't comfortable with the internal politics and the strong influence of communist sympathizers within the organization at the time.
Interesting.
It makes you think about the compromises people sometimes feel pressured to make for the sake of career advancement.
It's a tension many of us face, right? Balancing ambition with integrity, especially in environments that might not align with your values. Drucker clearly wasn't willing to compromise his principles, even for a prestigious opportunity.
And then there are the visionaries, the folks who were so far ahead of their time that people often struggled to grasp their ideas. He writes about Buckminster Fuller, the architect and inventor known for his geodesic domes and his unconventional thinking.
Fuller was a fascinating character, always brimming with ideas and pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. Their first encounter was quite memorable.
Oh, really?
Drucker literally bumped into him at the Fortune offices, causing Fuller to fall off a scaffolding where he was drawing graphs of the world's future economy on the ceiling.
Talk about making a grand entrance.
I know, right?
It perfectly encapsulates Fuller's out-of-the-box thinking, his willingness to see the world from a completely different perspective.
And it highlights another important theme that runs throughout Drucker's work.
Yeah.
The importance of embracing new ideas even if they seem outlandish at first.
Right.
Sometimes the people who are ridiculed for being crazy turn out to be the ones who change the world.
It makes you wonder how many brilliant ideas are dismissed simply because they don't fit into the prevailing paradigm.
Right.
And then there's Marshall McLuhan, the media theorist, who coined that famous phrase, "The medium is the message."
McLuhan was another one of those figures who was ahead of his time. His ideas about the impact of technology on society and culture were groundbreaking, and they're even more relevant today in our digital age. It's interesting that Drucker initially dismissed McLuhan's work as piffle, but later came to appreciate his insights.
It shows that even someone as brilliant as Drucker could have blind spots, and that he was willing to reconsider his assumptions when presented with compelling evidence. That intellectual humility is something I really admire.
Absolutely. It's a quality that's essential for anyone who wants to truly understand the world and their place in it. And speaking of understanding the world, Drucker's time at General Motors was a real turning point in his thinking. He had the opportunity to observe and analyze the inner workings of one of the world's largest corporations, and it gave him valuable insights into the complexities of management, the challenges of balancing efficiency with social responsibility, and the evolving role of business in society.
He had a front row seat to the rise of the modern corporation, and he was able to see both its potential and its pitfalls. What stood out to you about his experiences at GM?
Well, his interactions with Alfred Sloan, the legendary CEO who shaped the company's success, are particularly illuminating.
Yeah.
Sloan was a brilliant strategist and a firm believer in the importance of professional management.
Okay.
But Drucker felt that Sloan's focus on management as a purely technical discipline overlooked its broader social responsibilities.
So they had a fundamental disagreement about the role of management in society. Sloan believed that a company's primary responsibility was to its shareholders, while Drucker argued that businesses had a responsibility to the common good, to the well-being of society as a whole. That tension between profit and purpose is still very much alive today, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's a tension that Drucker grapples with throughout his work.
Yeah.
He understood the power of business to create value, to drive innovation, to improve people's lives. But he also recognized that business, if left unchecked, could be a force for harm, for exploitation, for environmental degradation.
It makes you wonder, how do you harness the power of business for good?
Right.
How do you create organizations that are both profitable and ethical, that contribute to a more just and sustainable world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a question that Drucker dedicated his life to exploring. He believed that business leaders had a moral obligation to consider the broader impact of their decisions, to think beyond the bottom line, and consider the long-term consequences of their actions.
His time at GM wasn't just about observing the mechanics of a large corporation.
Right.
It was about grappling with these fundamental questions about the purpose of business and society.
Exactly. And those questions are more relevant than ever today as we face challenges like climate change, social inequality, and rapid technological advancements.
Yeah.
We need leaders who can navigate these complexities, who can balance profit with purpose, who can build organizations that are not just successful, but also ethical and sustainable.
It's a tall order,
Right.
but it's one that Drucker believed was essential for the future of humanity. And his insights drawn from his unique experiences and his deep understanding of human nature are invaluable as we grapple with these challenges.
Absolutely. Adventures of a Bystander isn't just a memoir. It's a roadmap for navigating a world that's increasingly complex and interconnected.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation.
It really has.
We'll be back in a moment to explore the final chapter of Drucker's Indian Summer of Innocence and the lasting legacy of his ideas. We're back, and as we've been kind of delving into Adventures of a Bystander, one of the most powerful themes I think that keeps emerging is this idea of the Indian Summer of Innocence.
Right.
Drucker uses that phrase to describe the period between the two world wars. And it just seems to capture this sense of optimism, but mixed with a growing awareness of just the fragility of that era.
Yeah, it's such an evocative phrase, isn't it? It conjures up images of warmth and beauty, but also a hint of melancholy. The knowledge that summer can't last forever, and Drucker, having lived through the horrors of the First World War, was acutely aware of those shadows, lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly carefree time.
Yeah, he talks about how he initially tried to escape the shadow of pre-war Europe, only to find that America had its own version of that, a longing for a simpler time before the Depression, before the rise of fascism, before the world was plunged back into chaos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as we've discussed, he witnessed firsthand the deep-seated inequalities that persisted in American society, the systemic racism faced by Black Americans, the economic anxieties that plague so many days. Those cracks in the facade of the American dream were impossible to ignore.
And yet there was still this sense of possibility, this belief that things could get better. You see it in Drucker's descriptions of the people he met, the ideas they were grappling with, the innovations they were driving. It's almost like they were trying to outrun the darkness to build a brighter future before the storm hit.
And then, of course, comes Pearl Harbor. That brutal attack just shattered the illusion of American isolationism, marking a definitive end to the Indian Summer of Innocence.
It's a turning point not just for America, but for the world. And you can feel the shift in Drucker's writing from that point forward. His focus becomes sharper, his analysis more urgent. He seems to recognize that the world has entered a new era of complexity and uncertainty, and the stakes are higher than ever.
Absolutely. The events of World War II and the rise of the Cold War forced Drucker to confront the challenges of a world and constant flux, a world where old certainties had crumbled and new threats were emerging, and his writings from this period reflect a deeper understanding of the need for strong ethical leadership, for organizations that are both effective and responsible, for individuals who can navigate this increasingly complex landscape.
As we've been talking about Drucker and his bystander perspective, I've been thinking about how relevant his insights are today,
Yeah.
We're living through a time of immense change with technological disruption, political polarization, global uncertainty. It almost feels like we're in another Indian Summer of Innocence, teetering on the edge of something we can't fully grasp.
It's an interesting parallel, and I think Drucker's emphasis on the importance of individual action, of challenging assumptions, of embracing change, is more crucial than ever. He believed that in times of upheaval, individuals have the power to make a difference, to shape the course of events to create a better future.
It's a message of hope, but also a call to responsibility. He's not saying sit back and wait for things to happen. He's urging us to engage, to think critically, to take action.
Exactly. And that's what makes Adventures of a Bystander such a powerful and enduring book. It's not just a collection of anecdotes or a historical account. It's a guide for navigating uncertainty, for making sense of a world that's constantly changing.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, individuals have agency. They have the capacity to learn, to grow, to contribute, to make a difference. And that's a message that I think we all need to hear right now.
Absolutely. And it's a testament to Drucker's genius that his insights drawn from his experiences in the 20th century are still so relevant and resonant today. He understood the enduring truths of human nature, the complexities of organizations, the challenges and possibilities of leadership.
Well, we've barely scratched the surface of Adventures of a Bystander, but I think you can see why it resonated with us. Drucker's observations on those seemingly ordinary years are incredibly relevant today, especially his emphasis on the importance of individuals in shaping society. And who knows, maybe this deep dive will inspire you to explore more of Drucker's work. He wrote a lot, and his insights into management leadership and the nature of society are as valuable today as they were when he first penned them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Drucker's work is a treasure trove of wisdom, and Adventures of a Bystander is a perfect entry point for anyone who wants to understand the man and his ideas. And who knows, maybe it will even inspire you to embrace your own bystander perspective, to look at the world with a fresh set of eyes and discover the possibilities that await.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey through the life and times of Peter Drucker. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a book that sparked your curiosity. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.